Hello, my name is Aviva, and today I'm going to be showing you guys the best and worst books on each of my bookshelves. So if you haven't seen this challenge around before, we're basically going to be going through every single one of my bookshelves and picking out my favorite and my least favorite books from that shelf. So I've got a lot of shelves. I've got the one behind me, I've got the one next to me, and then I've got the one across from me. And if you're curious about my actual library and you wanted to see an in-depth thing of all of my bookshelves, then you should watch my bookshelf tour, which came out the other week. I'm going to make sure to have it linked up on the screen as well as down below. So I'm not actually going to be deep diving into every single one of my books. I'm just going to be pulling my favorite and my least favorite off of my shelves and sharing them with you guys, telling you why I like them the best and why I like them, the least from each one of my shelves, that sort of thing. I didn't actually come up with this idea though. I actually saw Jesse the reader do this the other week, and I thought it was a great idea. And actually, he didn't come up with it either. Haley in Bookland came up with it last year from one of her followers, gave her this idea. So basically, I'm gonna make sure that both of those inspiration videos are linked in the description below in case you wanted to check those out yourself. But either way, I don't think there's any more of an introduction needed. So if you're not currently subscribed to my channel, make sure to hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and if you're not following me on my other social medias, then make sure to follow me. I have all of my links in the description down below. You can follow me on Instagram, TikTok, and GOODREADS. So out of pure laziness, I've decided that I'm just going to back up and we're going to do this whole shelf from this view. I was originally going to go zoom into each shelf and then zoom back out, but honestly, that is a lot of work and I don't have patience for that today. So I'm just going to be going back and forth from these shelves and we're going to go one at a time. So as you could kind of see, or if you see my bookshelf tour, then you already know that this shelf behind me is kind of like an L. So I've actually decided we're going to split each shelf up into two, only because, it's going to be hard to pick just one of each, genre, the good genre and then the bad genre from each one of these shelves because they're so big. So we're actually going to cut it right in the middle, and I'm going to do this as one shelf and then that as one shelf. So we've got 6 shelves to go through over here. So this is actually really hard because this first shelf all the way to the end is basically my favorite of all time favorite books. We've got Throne of Glass, ACOTAR, From Blood and Ash, as well as my favorite series of all time, which is the Trial series by Amanda Hocking. So seriously, how am I supposed to pick this? I really have no idea. Also, are we going by series or just a single book? I feel I should jump the series all together so that it makes it easier, but then I feel I'm not challenging myself enough. So we just got to pick one book. So really, if we're going between Throne of Glass and ACOTAR, it's really between Queen of Shadows and then A Court of Misty and Fury. And which one do I choose? I have no idea. So I feel this would be the perfect time for me to tell you guys about the debate that I've had in my head 1,000 times between which series is better, Throne of Glass or ACOTAR. And I actually have my answer, but I'm not going to tell you guys, only because I think that my answer has to be followed up with a 10-minute reasoning as to why I feel that way. And I don't really want to make this entire video about Throne of Glass versus ACOTAR. So if you were curious about that and you maybe wanted me to make a 10-minute video about me chatting with myself about which series is better, then let me know down in the comment section below, because I've considered it a couple of times, but I thought it makes me a little bit too crazy of a Sarah J. Maas fan to basically debate with myself for 10 minutes which one is better and why I feel that way. But besides for all of that random information I just gave you, I did make a decision, and we are going with A Court of Mist and Fury as my favorite book from this shelf. So this book basically tops off everything from Throne of Glass, everything from ACOTAR, as well as some of my favorite series of all time. Why? Because of where I stand. But I really can't say anything more than that. For the few people who are crazy enough to have never read this series yet, I don't know what you're waiting for. If you like fantasy romances, then you should have read this series already, because it's maybe the best thing you'll ever read. But besides for that, the reasons why I really do love this book over everything else is because I feel this book specifically is just jam-packed with amazing scene after amazing scene. From beginning to end, I don't think this book has any lulls. I think it was a real masterpiece by Sarah J. Maas, and I am wholeheartedly obsessed with this book, to the point that when I'm bored and I need something to fill my mind, I sometimes go through this entire book in my head and see if I could get each one of the scenes in order of how they happen, because there's so many that happen, and sometimes I mix up it in my head as which one came first. So it's kind of a game that I play in my head. That just proves, first of all, of how crazy I am as a reader, but also as a Sarah J. Maas fan, and specifically A Court of Mist and Fury fan. So this is the best book on that shelf by far. And for the worst book on that shelf, I'm actually going with The Lost City by Amanda Hocking. So this is actually the first book in the 3rd series from the Trial universe, which is one of my like my favorite universes of all time. So it actually makes it sad that I didn't enjoy this series at all. So I don't know why it was that I didn't love it. Either it was like a little bit younger or it just didn't add up to the other series from this universe. And therefore I'm going with this book as my least favorite from that universe, but also really like we're secretly putting in the entire series only because I didn't like the whole thing like at all. So I'm looking at this shelf and I realized that like literally more than half of it is unread. So I have to like pick through only like 3 different series and like which book from that series is going to be my favorite and least, and happens to be so unfortunately, but I don't actually love anything from this series. So these choices are basically from like a mediocre collection of books that I wasn't the hugest fan of. But I'm gonna say that the best book from this entire like bookshelf is going to be The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. So happens to be, if you've been to my channel before, then you might be aware that I thought that this series was a little bit overhyped, but I'm not going to say that it was a bad series. I just expected a lot more from it considering all the hype that it got, but still I enjoyed it enough to say that it will be my favorite book off of that shelf. And then I've chosen the Iron Face series to be like my least favorite series / book off of that shelf, only because first of all, I've only read 3 series off of that shelf, and I have to say that I think that this one is my least favorite, only because I know that this is like a YA like series about fae and like, you know, forbidden romance and a lot of like war sort of things, but honestly, I thought that this book was middle grade and I was like super disappointed in the writing style and the way that like it was just like told. I felt like I was told everything in this story instead of like experiencing it, if that makes sense. And it really like bummed it out because it had such a great premise. Like the story itself was actually pretty solid, but its execution was so horrible that this will be my least favorite book / series from that shelf. So shelf number 2 is actually really hard because we actually have the entire like Shadow and Bone series as well as a couple of books that I haven't read yet before. So we're just like not counting that. But then I've got like Mistborn and like Emperor in the Ashes, like that whole series. So it was really hard to choose, but I am going to be going with Mistborn / the first book, which is The Final Empire, mostly because I remember thoroughly enjoying this series when I read it. I was super captivated. I didn't really want to put it down. I kept just wanting to know what was going on. And the runner up for this was 6 of Crows by Leigh Bardugo, which is, you know, one of the Shadow and Bone books, but I didn't win over it only because I just feel like this book, like in general, tops 6 of Crows, even though 6 of Crows was extremely enjoyable. So this is going to be my favorite book from that shelf. And then picking the worst book from that shelf was actually not as hard as I expected it to be. So I'm actually going specifically with A Torch Against the Night by Sabaa Tahir. This is the second book in the Ember and the Ashes series. And why I have chosen this book to be my least favorite from that entire shelf is mostly because this was the beginning of the downfall for this series for me. I absolutely loved the first book, but then everything that happened in this book, all of the decisions that were made and the way that the story went is basically the reasoning as to why the series went downhill for me. I was super disappointed as to where this series went. Not that it was a bad series at all, but I just wanted some things from this series and I basically didn't get them, like every single turn that the author decided to make. And this was basically like the beginning of the end for me. So that's why I'm going with this book specifically. So then for the shelf next to me, we have like a half shelf that I haven't read, as well as like a couple of books that I have read from here. So we've got like The Kiss of Deception. We've got the entire Graceling series, as well as, I'm pretty sure that's actually it. Most of that shelf is actually unread. So I'm going to be going with The Kiss of Deception as my favorite like book / series from that shelf, mostly because I absolutely love this series. It's kind of like a love triangle, princess, prince sort of romance thing in like this weird like fantasy world that doesn't actually have any magic, and there's a lot of like politics and war sort of things going on. Anyway, I absolutely love this series, and the first book was amazing because it's like the beginning of this love story that you're just gonna follow for 2 more books. So basically, favorite book from that shelf. And then least favorite is actually going to be the Fallen Kingdom series, which was behind there. So I didn't realize it when I was looking for all the books that I've read from this series, but this is hidden away behind the little white plaque. And either way, this is going to be my least favorite book / series from that shelf, mostly because this is following like a lot of characters throughout a collection of like 6 books. And I found like we were following like too many people. Not that it was bad. I happen to think a lot of people would absolutely love this series if you're into multiple POVs. I'm just not into multiple POVs. Once we get to like more than 2 people, I find myself like not as interested in like the third character or like the least interesting character, and then I find myself like skipping half the book. So basically this is going to be my least favorite series from that shelf, even though I do know that a lot of people are like absolutely in love with this, and I'm not saying it's a bad series. It was just my least favorite from that shelf. So I know you might not be able to see it like so fully, plus I'm like half blocking it, but we're now on the bottom shelf. And actually this is really hard because we have got a couple of really good series. We have like the Ravenhood series, as well as like the Shadow Fall series. And then we also have like, what is it? We have like a Darker Shades of Magic, and we have like the Invisible Life of Adelie Rue, and like the Starless Sea, as well as like a Sorcery of Thrones. We've got some really good ones, but I don't know which one to choose because honestly, I really like all of them for different reasons. But I think I'm going to be going with, one second, A Discovery of Witches, only because I feel like when I look at all of these shelves, even though there are a lot that like, you know, I really do like from that shelf specifically, I feel like, you know, this one has a special place in my heart, mostly because this was one of the first books that I found for myself when I got into reading. Usually like people would recommend me a book, or like, you know, I would just like find it randomly in my house and decide to read it because like one of my siblings had read it. But this is the first book that I went to a store and I picked up myself and decided to read like way out of the blue. And happens to be, it was absolutely amazing. And I love this series so much, but I also feel like, you know, I should just say that it is my favorite from this entire like shelf, only because, you know, it's got a special place in my reading journey. So then the entire last shelf, I'm not even joking, from the white plaque up until the end is my entire Shadow Hunter, like, you know, universe sort of books. I have like basically every single book in the universe, and it takes up my entire shelf, minus 3 more books. I also have a Darker Shades of Magic series, which is right at the end, and then like 2 random books I haven't read. So it's basically between, do I want to choose like one book from my Shadow Hunter series to be my favorite, or do I want to say like the Darker Shades of Magic is my favorite? And honestly, like I feel like people are going to like, you know, harass me in the comments to say that like I liked a Darker Shades of Magic over Shadow Hunters. I don't know. All right, I just sat here for like 5 minutes straight staring at all of these books and being like, what the hell do I do? But I've made a decision, and I'm going with Tales from the Shadowhunter Academy, which is kind of like the unofficial epilogue to the Mortal Instruments series. You're following Simon as he goes to the Shadowhunter Academy. I don't really want to say much more than that because, you know, spoilers for Mortal Instruments. But basically, I think that this might be my favorite book from the entire Shadowhunter universe, and I decided to choose this over the Darker Shades of Magic series as a whole, even though I absolutely love that series. It's by V.E. Schwab, if you're not familiar. And I just want to give it an honorable mention, as it was my runner-up as like, you know, that or Shadowhunters. But, you know, Shadowhunters just has to win because I feel like it takes up like a huge like part of my brain, and therefore it deserves to be better than like one single series. But Tales from the Shadowhunter Academy, I really loved this book. I don't know why it's my favorite book from the entire universe, but just something about it. I remember having like the best time reading this, and that's why, you know what, it's going to be my favorite from that shelf. Oh my god, all right. So this is so hard to say because, you know, so many people are in like love with Shadowhunters, but I am going with Chain of Gold as my least favorite from that entire shelf. First of all, because the only other things to choose from is like a Dark Shades of Magic, because I already said is like the runner up. So, you know, you can't choose that. And then basically we have to choose one book from the entire Shadowhunter universe. And I'm definitely going with Chain of Gold, mostly because I didn't really love this book. I thought we were following way too many characters. I thought the storyline was like not as interesting as the rest of the Shadowhunter series, mostly because this was more of like a character-driven book. And while I loved all of the characters, I just thought we were following too many of them, and I kind of like lost track, didn't really care enough for each of them. Also, each of these books are like 800 pages long, and I just thought it was way too much, and I really, for some reason, I just didn't care so much about it. So, unfortunately, this is my least favorite from the Shadowhunter universe, but also from that bookshelf. So I didn't think this through because this might be the hardest thing I have to do, because the shelf that's behind me is more or less all of my romances, and all of these shelves are so big. So basically I'm going to have to choose like my favorite romance of all time. I'm only going to get like 2.5 choices because the bottom 2 shelves are all my romances, and like the top shelf is like half romance, half other things. So really I shouldn't have done this video, but it's already too late because I filmed half of it. So we're going to start with the top shelf. I'm going to have to climb up the ladder to, you know, get to it because it's that high, but one second. So it's pretty funny because I've read a lot of the shelf, but I don't actually like love any of them. I basically have the Nevermore, like the Trials of Morgan Crow on the shelf. I also have the Smoke and Bones series by Laini Taylor, which I actually even DNF'd, and then I have Strange the Dreamer, the Sight series, and then a few books I haven't read. So I'm pretty sure I'm going to go with the Nevermore series by Jessica Townsend as my favorite book from that shelf. It's funny because Strange the Dreamer was a runner-up because I really enjoyed that book in the moment, but honestly, I don't think about it often. But I do think about this random middle grade series that I decided to read. I'm almost positive this is like the only middle grade series I actually read as an adult, but I really do love it. So I am going to take it as my best book from that shelf. I totally should have grabbed the like least favorite while I was up there. Ugh, now I have to go climb again. But it's funny because even though the Scythe series is up there, and I've like said a couple of times on my channel that I wasn't the hugest fan of it, I am going with The Daughter of Smoke and Bone by Laini Taylor because this is actually one of the only series I've really DNF'd from like, you know, my entire reading experience. I've only DNF'd maybe like 5 books / series like my entire reading career. And this is definitely one of them, and a very memorable one with that. I did not like this series at all. It was like an instant love thing. And even though the fantasy world is really cool, I thought that the instant love was such a big part of this story. And at the same time, like I absolutely hate instant love, like literally barf, absolutely hate it. So this is definitely going to be my least favorite from that shelf, with Scythe as a runner-up because I wasn't the hugest fan of that series in general. All right, so on shelf number 2, we have like the Hunger Games. We have a couple of series I haven't read. We have like Vicious by V.E. Schwab. We have the entire Diviner series, a couple of more books I haven't read, and then we have the Truly Devious series and like the Study in Charlotte series, which I have read before. So basically, it's basically like a mishkabobble of books that I have read and haven't read. But for my favorite, I do think I'm going to go with the Truly Devious series by Maureen Johnson. That was Cooper. I don't know what he's barking at. All right, so thank you, Cooper, for stopping to bark. We're going with Truly Devious by Maureen Johnson. This is a YA mystery series that I literally devoured in less than 3 days. It's a collection of 3 books. I read them in like less than 3 days. Nobody spoke to me for 3 days straight. I love this series so much. It was very like unputdownable for me, and I thoroughly enjoyed the story. So I really have to say that this was my favorite from that shelf. Oh, and just by the way, I'm not coming down over there because like my least favorite book is going to be Vicious by V.E. Schwab, and it doesn't deserve for me to go all the way off of this ladder just because I didn't like it that much. I know that so many people absolutely love this series, but like I wasn't a really big fan of it. I did read the entire first book, but then I didn't continue with it only because I was like, what am I missing? I just wasn't a fan of it. Maybe I'm not like an X-Men sort of thing, like real life superpowered sort of thing. If I'm reading a fantasy, I really like a fantasy. So this book just was not up my alley at all, even though I do know like a lot of people love it. That's why I bought it and I tried it out. But unfortunately, it wasn't for me. All right, so I was able to get rid of the ladder because I could reach the next 3 shelves. So I figured, why not move closer so you can get a better view of all of my books, even though I'm not going to go into all of them. So I was actually looking at this top shelf over here, and I realized that actually more of it is romance than I thought, and all of the books that aren't romance, which are just these little books over here, I actually haven't read yet before. So basically, this entire shelf, I have to choose which is my favorite romance. And honestly, I'm having a really hard time. I was looking at it and I'm like, oh my God, which one am I going to choose? Because there are so many good ones. First of all, we have the Flock series by Kate Stewart. Then we have The Wall of Winnipeg by Marianne Spot. I absolutely loved that book. We have Josh and Hazel's Guide to Not Dating, which is right here, which is the first adult contemporary romance that I ever read, and it has a special place in my heart forever. I absolutely love that book. So basically, how do I choose? And also like down there, I'm assuming that there's going to be like a good book or two. So I've thought about this just slightly, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to go with The Wall of Winnipeg and then the Flock series as 2 of my favorite books from that shelf, because, you know, it's kind of mean of myself to ask me to choose between the 2 of these, even though it's really like choosing between 4 books, but we're going with these 2. Mostly because the Flock series by Kate Stewart was absolutely amazing, one-of-a-kind sort of book that I've just never read anything like this before, and I was like extremely surprised as to how much I like emotionally invested in this book. So it has to be up there with one of the best books from that shelf. But then also like The Wall of Winnipeg was absolutely amazing, and I keep thinking about this book as like maybe the best slow burn romance I've ever read. And now I thought that I wasn't a fan of slow burn, but you know, I've kind of been converted into like Mariana Zapata's like weird way of writing and keeping you on your toes, waiting for a kiss that isn't going to come to like the last chapter sort of thing. So basically, these 2 are like runners up for the best books from that shelf, with Josh and Hazel's Guide to Not Dating as a close 3rd. All right, and now for least favorite. I feel like, you know, I could be really mean here, so let me give this a really good thought. Oh my God, guys, there are like 3 books on here that I've actually like DNF'd or been really close to. We have Tweet Q, which I was not a huge fan of. We also have Second First Impressions, which I absolutely was so disappointed by because it's by Sally Thorne and I love Sally Thorne, and I thought that this book was like written by a different author. So definitely that was a huge disappointment. And then we have like Love at First, which I recently read and I just wasn't a fan of like at all, but I feel like that was on me. Like I feel like a lot of people would not like that book. So I do think that Tweet Cute, which I actually DNF'd, or Second First Impressions, which like I really wasn't a fan of. I think I'm gonna go Oh man, that fell. I think I'm gonna go with Second First Impressions by Sally Thorne, because even though I DNF'd Tweet Cute, I feel like I DNF'd it for personal reasons versus Second First Impressions I was so disappointed by, because it was written by Sally Thorne, which writes like really like page turner sort of romance books. She really knows how to like build up the angst and like make a good story. And I was just a huge fan of her other two books. But Second First Impressions, I absolutely hated. So it's going to be the worst book on that shelf. Like seriously, I can like choose like 5 of my favorites from the shelf, but I really have to choose one. So I'm kind of like leaning towards The Hating Game, even though The Spanish Love Deception is on this shelf too. And if you've like seen all of my videos, then you know that I've said that like The Spanish Love Deception, in my opinion, is better than The Hating Game, because there's more going on than just like the enemies to lovers workplace environment sort of thing. Because in The Spanish Love Deception, you also have like fake dating and like a wedding, and like they go on like this trip and all that sort of stuff. So technically it is better, but I'm going with The Hating Game only because I feel like this one, I don't know, it has a special place in my heart. I absolutely loved this book. I remember reading it. I skipped dinner that night. I literally spent all night sitting up reading this book because I couldn't fall asleep until it was over. I just remember like the feelings that I had while reading this. I remember the moment that I read it, and even though I do think that like The Spanish Love Deception might top this story-wise, I do think that this book was just as good, just as unputdownable, and I really loved it. So I am going to go with this one as my favorite from that shelf, but I did want to do a couple of honorable mentions, saying that, you know, The Spanish Love Deception is on that shelf, the Soulmate Equation is on that shelf, 99% Mine is on that shelf, as well as like Maybe Someday, which is even pointed out, which I remember really like having emotional feelings towards that book at the time of reading it. So, you know, basically this is an amazing shelf of romance standalones. If you wanted to take a screenshot, you know, and like try to look some of them up, or just watch my bookshelf tour, but either way, this was really hard. But The Hating Game, it's funny because just as hard as it was to pick one that I really enjoyed, I also have a couple of like ones I really didn't enjoy, because I have read most of this shelf. I'm currently debating between People We Meet on Vacation, which I found to be an extreme disappointment. Also, it sounded better in my head, which I found to be extremely forgettable, as well as there was one more. Oh right, The Ex Talk I'm thinking about choosing at the moment, because also I really didn't love that book for some reason, even though I know a lot of people liked it. And then was there any other ones that like might top off of like the worst book from that shelf? I don't think so. Okay, so what did I do? I chose 3. So it sounded better in my head. People We Meet on Vacation, The Ex Talk. I think I'm gonna go with People We Meet on Vacation, mostly because, I mean, I shouldn't really like, you know, say a book was like the worst off the shelf because it was unforgettable, because that's kind of like mean, because I remember enjoying it in the moment. And then The Ex Talk, I feel like, you know, it was personal reasons as to why I didn't like it. But People We Meet on Vacation, I thought there was a lot of problems with this book that a lot of people agreed with me on, and that's why I think that this was the worst written book on the shelf, mostly because I thought that it wasn't laid out correctly. All of the like dramatic important parts of this book that should have like, you know, been the roller coaster of up and downs weren't that interesting, and I didn't really like the dual timeline of it. I thought that we were way too much in the past. The storyline, the couples, you know, basically everything about this book I didn't like. So I'm just gonna stop there and say that this was the worst on that shelf. All right, the last shelf is actually really hard too, because I have a lot of my companion series here. I mean, we have, first of all, The Summer I Turned Pretty all the way in the corner, which I absolutely loved. It was one of the first books that I read when I started to get back into reading, so it has like a very special place in my heart. My sister recommended it to me, and you know, I've kind of read it twice in the past year, so I really like that series. But then also like the Come Back to Me series by Mila Gray. That's a companion series. I absolutely love every single one of those books. They're so amazing. And then, you know, the Off Campus series by like Elle Kennedy. I mean, these books are so freaking good. And then, you know, we have a bunch of standalones that like, you know, are pretty solid. So it's going to be hard to choose one. Oh my God, the last thing you said, this was such a good book. I like really remember having like good emotional feelings while reading this book. So it's kind of really hard to choose between all of these. What am I going to do? I don't know. I feel like maybe I should stick with, I don't know, Run Away With Me by Mila Gray. I don't know. I mean, honestly, we're not going to go with like my favorite, because there are a lot of favorites from this. But Run Away With Me by Mila Gray, I really remember enjoying. This was like a best friends to enemies to like, you know, friends to lovers sort of again, with like a hockey romance sort of thing. And I don't know, I was just a huge fan of this book. I remember really enjoying it from the entire Come Back to Me series. But let's just do some honorable mentions, because we're at the end of this like video, right? Okay, so let me just quickly say that like the Summer I Turned Pretty. I really love this book. I definitely recommend it. This has like a huge special place in my heart. The Deal by Elle Kennedy. Oh my God, this is the best book from that series. The Last Thing You Said. Oh my God, if you like YA, really angsty, like dual POV sort of romances, you should 100% read this book. And then, oh my God, November 9 is on the shelf too. Like, what the hell? I didn't choose this as my favorite one. This is a great book as well. So really, it's kind of impossible to choose sometimes, you know? We're just gonna go with a couple of favorites. Okay, I'm gonna stop here, but like Make It Sweet by Kristen Callahan. This was awesome. And just like the shelf above it, there's actually a couple of books that I really wasn't the hugest fan of. So like I have a lot to choose from. I mean, we could technically say the entire Get a Life Chloe Brown series because those were extremely disappointed. Those actually might win, but let me just quickly go through the rest of them. I wasn't the hugest fan of, let's see what else is here. You Deserve Each Other. It was kind of like not my favorite book either. And also like The Wedding Date, I liked it but didn't love it, especially like considering how many books are absolutely amazing on the shelf. But I do think that once I just looked through all of it, I am going to go with the entire Get a Life Chloe Brown series by Talia Hibbert. I found these extremely disappointing. I really didn't like them. I know that so many people hype them up, say that they're like, you know, one of the best romances they've ever read. And I just wasn't a fan of the writing style. And because of that, the rest of the story, I was able to find like a lot of things that I didn't like about it. Like, how do you say it when people are just like, you know, automatically attracted to each other and that's where like the romance comes? I really like when it's kind of just built upon some other things other than the fact of like how people look. Like obviously people are attracted to each other right away, but I found like in all of these books there was like an automatic attraction that just like made the rest of the story happen. I don't know, there was just like a lot of stuff in this series that I didn't like in every single one of the books I found like the same problems over and over again. So I wasn't a fan. I'm going to choose this entire series as my least book / series from the last shelf in my library. So anyway, I wanted to just say thank you so much for watching this video. I'm curious to know, if you've seen any books you would have chosen, like, a least favorite, a most favorite, like, I don't know, just leave me a comment down in the section below. I like chatting with you guys. But anyway, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you're not currently subscribed to my channel, hit that subscribe button. And until next time, enjoy reading.